Why do people hate the Jeff rework again? Yeah, in case you weren't aware, there are still plenty of people angry about the Jeff rework. Weird, I know. Okay, don't get me wrong. I understand why people didn't like the idea of the rework when it was first shown off. Jeff may have not been a very good character, but he was fun, he was different, and he was popular. So why rework him? Or, I suppose I should say, why nerf him, because those changes they showed off really did not look good at first glance. But now? At this point? I don't see it. I'm speaking as someone who mained Jeff in Season 0 and then got lured with him after the rework. Jeff is really fun now. Genuinely, he has given me some of the most fun I've had playing a support in this game. And as I discussed in my video about Season 2.5, Jeff's kit really did need a rework. Even beyond the fact that he was pretty bad, Jeff had some serious, glaring fundamental flaws with his kit. Flaws that the rework addressed pretty neatly. But despite all that, I still see comments complaining about Healbot Jeff, the death of DPS Jeff, and I just don't get it. So, if you are one of those people who still isn't impressed with the Jeff rework, this video goes out to you. I really mean it when I say Jeff is one of the more fun supports in the game right now. His current kit has everything that was fun about his old unique design and playstyle, and more. And if after this video you still don't want to give him another shot, well, all I can say is that you're really missing out. So, without further ado, let's get into explaining why the Jeff rework is pretty great, actually. Alright, so just so everybody is on the same page, I want to start off by going over Jeff's old kit, his strengths and weaknesses, and the changes that were made with his rework. Jeff is a support, and one of the few characters given 1 star on the game's difficulty scale. As such, both of his kits, old and new, were and are exceedingly simple. Jeff's primary fire, Joyful Splash, sees him shooting a wide beam of water. This beam pierced and healed all allies caught in it, but had no effect on enemies. His alt fire, meanwhile, was a projectile spit attack that dealt splash damage. Both of these attacks had separate but connected ammo pools, so when you reloaded one, you reloaded both, and it's worth noting that you could not use both of these attacks at the same time. Both the healing done by his primary and the damage done by his alt fire were decent. Nothing too impressive compared to some of the other supports, but definitely solid. And Jeff was noteworthy for being able to weave his primary and secondary weapons together much more efficiently than any other character with a dual weapon setup. This had its uses, like being able to quickly swap to shoot an Namor turret, break a shield, or confirm a kill, but Marvel Rivals being the game it is, taking your finger off the heal button did carry a great deal of risk. When not healing for even a moment could spell death for one of your teammates thanks to the game's very low time to kill, getting merely decent damage as a reward for switching to your secondary fire was questionably worth it at times. Though another thing about Joyful Splash was its ability to easily heal allies while at extreme range, which other supports couldn't do as easily or at all. So with a kit this simple, having 2 of his abilities be merely considered alright doesn't bode well for Jeff as a character. But Jeff's kit was really made by the abilities Healing Bubble and Hide and Seek. Healing Bubble was an ability with 6 charges that regenerated decently quickly, and there was no cooldown in between uses of the ability. Upon firing the ability, Jeff would spit out a Healing Bubble. If a bubble hit an ally, or if a friendly walked over one that had settled onto the ground, the bubble would pop, creating a burst of AoE healing. In addition, all friendlies in the radius, including the Jeff, would receive a temporary speed boost and a plus healing received buff to all subsequent healing. Hide and Seek, meanwhile, was a movement ability that allowed Jeff to dive into the ground. In this state, Jeff gained a faster movement speed, a much smaller hitbox that couldn't be headshot, crowd control immunity, and the ability to scale walls and ceilings. But most importantly, he would constantly regenerate health while in this state. Also crucially, Jeff could remain in this state indefinitely, and could shift back and forth between standing and hide and seek with very little cooldown. Now, it should be fairly obvious what Jeff's biggest strength was, but there are still two more aspects of his kit worth mentioning. Firstly, because of the nature of Jeff's model and hitbox, he was given a passive that slightly reduced all critical headshot damage taken. This wasn't enough to allow Jeff to stand up to serious fire, but it did mess with certain characters' damage breakpoints. For example, Adam Warlock required 4 headshots to kill Jeff as opposed to the 3 he'd normally need to kill any other character with the same health pool. And finally, we have Jeff's ultimate, which is one of the more iconic and silly ultimate abilities in the game. Upon activating It's Jeff, Jeff would dive into the ground, becoming completely untargetable, and could then re-emerge to swallow every enemy and ally in a fairly large radius. Jeff would then be placed in his hide-and-seek state, but with all the enemies and allies inside of him. Enemies inside the Jeff would take constant tick damage, while allies would be rapidly healed. Everyone trapped inside Jeff would be rendered completely unable to act in any way, and crucially, Jeff could then spit out the enemies and allies he swallowed, launching them in whatever direction he was facing. This could, of course, be used to launch enemies into bottomless pits. However, it's worth noting that there was nothing stopping Jeff from sacrificing himself for guaranteed kills by leaping into the pit with all the enemies still inside him. And as a final thing worth noting, enemies rendered CC immune or otherwise untargetable could not be swallowed. And if a Jeff died with people still inside him, they would be unceremoniously dropped wherever he was swimming in that moment. Alright. Now with all that laid out, Jeff's biggest strengths were his survivability and his elusiveness. With some pretty basic use of Healing Bubble and Hide and Seek, Jeff could easily escape from nearly any situation. He was virtually unkillable in the right hands, was impossible to slow down thanks to his CC immunity, and he could also get into nearly any position he wanted because of his speed and his ability to easily get into hard-to-reach spaces. Plus, Jeff's abundant self-healing made him virtually immune to chip damage and random spam. Besides that, his ability to speed boost his allies was also nice. It aided slower characters like Magneto and Adam Warlock, enabled your team to be extra aggressive and take ground at the start of a round, and was useful generally for just helping people get where they need to go. And when it comes to his healing, Jeff's burst healing was nearly unmatched. Tossing a couple of your healing bubbles onto an ally was a quick and easy way to instantly get them back into the fight. Plus, a pretty underrated part of Jeff's kit was being able to use healing bubbles to essentially leave mini health packs anywhere on the map, which could be a lifesaver for both the Jeff and his teammates. However, there were some pretty glaring holes in his kit. Healing Bubble recharged fairly quickly, but it did still take a while to get multiple of your charges back, and when you had to toss 2 or 3 of them on one person to save them, you were going to get caught out without enough healing bubbles often enough to feel it. Especially if you were trying to take advantage of Healing Bubble's other uses. The game's insane damage numbers meant that your teammates could easily be knocked right back down to low health after you saved them, and that back and forth was generally not weighted in the Jeff's favor. And speaking of his healing, like I said earlier, his healing from Joyful Splash really wasn't great. It did the job, and it was nice that it could heal several allies at the same time and do it from extremely far away, but without the buff from Healing Bubble, it wasn't turning any heads. All this means Jeff's ability to support his team was basically entirely carried by one ability, Healing Bubble, which means he struggled with prolonged engagements. Now that might not sound like the biggest deal, but in Rivals, a game with very high healing numbers that also encourages its supports to do nothing but heal all the time, these prolonged engagements were going to be common, and that left Jeff at a major disadvantage. But always being able to heal several allies at once was still really valuable, right? Sure, but if it was blanket heals you wanted, then Rocket was right there, and he did it better. And that brings me to the biggest problem with old Jeff. Healing Bubble, as good as it was just not enough to prevent Jeff from being outshined by every other support. Luna, Snow, and Mantis could stop a ton of the game's ultimate abilities with their stuns, which was already really good, but with Luna's ability to spread healing to people without even needing to see them and Mantis's damage boost stacked on top of that, there really was no contest. Then you had Adam Warlock and Loki, who essentially had mini defensive ultimates on cooldowns. And then you had Cloak and Dagger's Blind, which could help confirm kills, blunt enemy pushes, and could even temporarily neuter certain offensive ultimates like Star-Lord's. And all that is before we get into their ghost form and the fact that Dagger could hand out the same plus healing received buff that Jeff could. So, at least on release, that left us with Rocket, whose revive beacon could swing entire games in the right scenario. And as if that weren't enough, most of those examples all had way better and more consistent healing than poor Jeff. Jeff's ability to heal at extreme range didn't even help him stand out because Rocket did that too. The only thing that Jeff had that gave him a leg up on the other supports was his insane survivability, but that did nothing to help his team, at least not by itself. But despite his poor performance compared to the other supports, Jeff was still a really popular character, and believe me, I understand why. Even if he wasn't very good at supporting his team, he was really chill. It's the same reason why people like playing Scarlet Witch. The character being easy and uncomplicated makes them relaxing and fun for a lot of people. But there's another big factor in the old Jeff's popularity, and that was DPS Jeff. See, his survivability and movement meant that Jeff could comfortably get himself stuck in just about anywhere, and if the Jeff chose to lurk in the enemy's backline, then that meant a lot of potential problems for the enemy team. Circling back to Jeff's alt-fire, it wasn't super strong, but it was still respectable damage, and when the source of that respectable damage was a slippery fish who couldn't die and just wouldn't go away, well, that respectable gets bumped up to downright threatening. With Jeff's support options just not good enough, and with his insane survivability being the only thing that stood out about his kit, that left DPS Jeff as by far the best way to get value out of his kit in serious play. With this playstyle, Jeff went from support to aggressive flanker, using his damage, mobility, and survivability to endlessly harass the enemy's backline, threatening the enemy with damage and forcing them to divide their attention. Here, in this scenario, Jeff was special. His damage wasn't amazing, but he couldn't just be ignored. He was easily still threatening enough to, say, force a Cloak and Dagger to use one of their valuable defensive cooldowns, or disrupt the enemy's positioning and momentum by injuring someone and forcing them to retreat and take cover. Or, best case scenario, piss the enemy off so much that they waste a ton of time and resources trying to kill him instead of gunning for the objective. This playstyle was really different and really fun and interesting for the Jeff player, because it wasn't like DPS Jeff was really trying to get kills. It was more like he was constantly threatening to get kills, and generating value because he couldn't just be ignored and required more than a cursory amount of effort to deal with. If you've played Captain America or Venom for a decent enough time, you probably know what that's like. It's very weird, but very satisfying. So Jeff wasn't the best support, but DPS Jeff did give him a valid niche, especially in a triple support comp with Luna Snow, allowing you to take advantage of the boost in offensive power provided by the old chilling charisma team-up. So that all sounds pretty good, right? Like, there was room to buff aspects of his kit for certain, but old Jeff seemed to have a solid identity. He was hard to kill, had okay utility and healing, but also had a really interesting alternate playstyle. So there was nothing that would call for a rework or a big overhaul, right? Well, rework and overhaul Jeff's kit the devs did, much to the confusion of most of the community. Because this section is already dragging on a bit, I'm just going to present the changes made in the rework point by point. 1. Added a new effect to Joyful Splash. Now also deals damage to enemies, can heal allies through other allies and enemies, and added Fall Off that reduces both its damage and healing per second at long range. 2. Changed to Aqua Burst, that's Jeff's spit attack, to a charge ability with a maximum of 3 charges, and added a knockback effect on direct hits. 3. Changed Healing Bubble from a burst heal to healing over time, increased the total healing, but reduced the maximum charges from 6 to 3. 4. Hide and Seek now has a resource meter that limits the amount of time you can spend underground. 5. Allies swallowed by It's Jeff gain overhealth in addition to the health regen. 6. increased the damage reduction received from Jeff's passive. And 7, increased the ultimate cost of its Jeff. Okay. Yikes. Let's just really quickly break this down. They nerfed Jeff's healing, nerfed his damage, nerfed his utility and his burst healing, nerfed his survivability, and nerfed his ultimate. All in exchange for... what? A little bit of damage on Joyful Splash, some knockback, and some piddly little buffs elsewhere? Yeah, I shouldn't have to tell you that people were both baffled and furious over these changes. It looked like they took everything about Jeff's kit that was notable or special and stomped on it. Healing Bubble was the main thing that made Jeff okay as a support, and that had just been gutted. Half the charges, no more burst healing, and to top it all off, the healing from Joyful Splash was also nerfed for some reason. Oh, and don't forget DPS Jeff. Dear lord, did this playstyle look dead. This rework looked like a big hit to his survivability and mobility, but his damage looked like it was just gone. Absolutely massacred. His spit attack was already just fine, and that was when it had 12 shots. What the hell was anyone gonna do with 3? 3 charges that regenerated 1 at a time, no less. And then the meager buffs he got just felt like they were adding insult to injury. The knockback on his spit attack didn't look like it served any purpose, especially when he only had 3 shots. Then the buff to his ultimate was just confusing. Who cares about swallowing your allies with its Jeff? It was always best to swallow enemies and use the ultimate to try and get picks. And what was the benefit to risking your life and using your ultimate just to give your teammates some overhealth, especially when they nerfed his ult charge in the same update? And when that realization hit, people got even angrier. Jeff's ultimate, as fun and silly as it was nothing compared to the game's other support ults. The chance to get a couple of picks was nothing compared to making you and your entire team effectively invincible, but the devs decided to nerf it. But the thing that really got under people's skin was the buff to Joyful Splash. A little bit of damage on his beam? Really? Was that supposed to make up for this popular character essentially being taken out back behind the shed? And that was before people started thinking about it. Wait a moment. What they basically just did was put all of Jeff's power into his main heal. You had basically no reason not to just heal all the time. They'd taken Jeff, this really unique character, and turned him into another heal bot, just like so many of the other supports in the game. And when that realization hit, that's when the Doom posting really took off. People, myself included, had already complained a great deal about the game's support experience. Most of the supports did basically nothing but heal all the time, and while Jeff did fall into this trap himself, DPS Jeff allowed him to rise above. But DPS Jeff was now dead as far as everyone was concerned, and it looked like, instead of maybe adding another utility ability to Jeff's kit or maybe buffing his healing and leaving DPS Jeff intact, they just stripped everything unique about him away. And this rework even managed to get underneath the skins of the casual audience. With Jeff's survivability nerfed, the people who thought it was funny to just be unkillable were mad, and the people who just like to do silly stuff in Doom Match were angry too. One popular thing to do was for 2 Jeffs to stand facing one another using Joyful Splash. The animation made it kinda look like they were kissing, which was funny and cute, and you could also use these Jeff kisses to do other silly things with the enemy. But now, that wasn't possible. With the damage added to Joyful Splash, Jeff would just hurt the people he was trying to kiss. And while I personally like to think of this as a bold philosophical stance on the true painful nature of love, to a lot of casual players, this looked like everything silly and cute about Jeff was being taken away. But looks can be deceiving, especially when we're talking about balance changes in an online game like this. And when we actually got our hands on the Jeff rework, well, you saw the montage at the beginning of the video. But how is that possible? How could Jeff possibly have gotten out of this balance change okay? And hey, why did they even rework Jeff in the first place? Okay, I just spent way too long talking about why Jeff was bad, but that still begs the question. Why didn't they just buff Jeff instead of overhauling him like this? Well, Jeff is a pretty tricky character to balance. He's very simple and easy to play, and the game advertises him as such, so his kit attracts a lot of newer and less experienced players. If they tried buffing him by adding another ability to Jeff's kit, that could complicate him, potentially making him less attractive to those newer players. So that leaves simply buffing his numbers, but that's also potentially a bad idea. If Jeff had healing that was good enough to compete with the other supports while also being much easier to use, in addition to his insane survivability and long range, then that opens up a whole can of worms for the game's balance. In regards to playing against a buffed Jeff, if he could effortlessly shut down any play with solid, easy-to-use healing with virtually no downtime while also being impossible to kill, then that wouldn't be very fun to play against at all. And in regards to playing around a buffed Jeff, well, that might feel pretty bad for other support players. If Jeff could do all the healing of another support with a fraction of the effort, while, again, being impossible to kill, then playing a different support may very well feel like a waste of time. And I'm not trying to say that any of these feelings would necessarily be valid, but I do think that's how players would feel, and player perception still matters a lot. But I think there's a much bigger reason for Jeff's rework than that. In my opinion, I don't think the devs were happy with the state of Jeff's kit. Think about it. This game has been out for a couple of months, and we've already seen the devs hit one of their characters with a massive rework. Now that's odd, right? Developers generally don't rework their characters like this, period. And having a dev team push such a big overhaul this soon into the game's lifespan is definitely strange. Why is this? Well, as I've said before, and will say again, game devs do not play their own games any more than a musician listens to their own songs or an author reads their own books. Lacking an experience with their own game's balance, the only thing they have to work with is numbers, but numbers don't tell the whole story. If, say, a character is too good or too weak because of a fundamental flaw with their design, the devs aren't going to pick up on that for a while, because they can't tell that just by looking at the numbers. That's why it takes developers forever to seriously address certain problems. Seven from Paladins and his infinite mobility comes to mind here, as do a couple characters in Rivals. That's why we get disastrous cycles of micro-nerfs and micro-buffs that don't address the fundamental problems. So why rework Jeff like this? Well, there was a fundamental flaw with the way he was designed that the devs had long been aware of. So what was that flaw? Well, like I said before, Jeff's ability to support his team was all riding on one ability, Healing Bubble, and I believe the devs were aware when initially designing Jeff that this could potentially prove problematic for his kit. I believe they probably weren't happy with Jeff's kit, but decided to ship it anyway for the sake of making sure Jeff was simple and easy to play at launch, and also just to see how it would work out. Why? Well, I imagine the devs at NetEase are very busy. This game is pretty polished, all things considered. The presentation is great, the gameplay is pretty smooth, but more importantly, the devs are constantly pushing out new content even more so than a lot of other live service games. In that environment, sometimes sacrifices have to be made, and you have to make the choice to push something you aren't happy with and see if it works out. So, when the devs witnessed Jeff quickly prove himself to be the worst support in the game, they likely saw it as the excuse they needed to address this kit they weren't happy with. In my mind, that neatly explains why the devs would rework Jeff the way they have when they did. But a less important, yet still major thing that I think motivated the devs to overhaul Jeff was the DPS Jeff playstyle. If you're a conspiratorial type, you might think that the devs just didn't like DPS Jeff and killed it because of that. And I'm here to tell you that you're kind of right, actually. The devs probably weren't happy with the state of DPS Jeff, but I don't think it was for the reasons you're probably thinking. DPS Jeff was really the only way to get value out of Jeff's old kit, and you might think, whatever, that just puts him on par with the other aggressive offensive supports like Adam Warlock and Mantis, right? But it doesn't. DPS Jeff was actually very different from those other supports. I mean, just look at the name. It's not aggressive support Jeff, it's DPS Jeff. Adam Warlock and Mantis both perform best when surrounded by teammates. Adam Warlock wants to stay in a group to maximize the effectiveness of Soul Bond, and Mantis wants to be damage boosting her teammates as much as she can. DPS Jeff, however, wanted to be as far away from his team as he could get away with. To put it simply, this support character was best played in a way that did nothing to support his team. A DPS Jeff only wanted to be using Healing Bubble, his main source of healing and utility, on himself, and a DPS Jeff would very rarely put themselves in a position where using Joyful Splash was advantageous or even possible. And this is problematic because of Jeff's position as the game's designated easy support. If a new player picks up Jeff and finds out somewhere along the way that he is best played in a way that does very little to support his team, then that could potentially warp their perspective on how the supports in this game are meant to be played, which could lead to frustration for the player later down the line. All this, understandably, didn't satisfy the devs. They likely weren't happy with Jeff's ability to support his team being wrapped up in one ability, and the state of DPS Jeff was likely seen as potentially problematic. I think it's probable that they knew DPS Jeff was a possible alternate playstyle, but I imagine it was disappointing for them to find out that it was by far the best way to seriously play Jeff. And I think this line of thinking is also backed up by the changes made to Jeff's team-up abilities, removing the offensive team-up with Luna Snow and replacing it with the Venom team-up, which is entirely focused on supporting the Jeff's teammates. Now, assuming all of that's true, that still begs the question: how does the Jeff rework address any of these problems? If the devs wanted to make Jeff do more to support his team, while also keeping him simple, how does this mess of meager buffs and hard nerfs achieve that? Well, in a way that's very tidy, clever, and satisfying, actually. It was shocking to me when I discovered how much a simple change like adding a little bit of damage to Joyful Splash added to Jeff's kit. This was actually one of the buffs I proposed when talking about the game's supports a few months ago, but I was only being partially serious. I didn't really think this would add much to Jeff's kit, but I've never been happier to be wrong. With these changes, the simple act of holding the fire button with Jeff does a lot to support your team, depending on where you're positioning and what you're directing your attention towards. By focusing your beam on, say, an Emma Frost who's in the thick of it, you're not only helping to keep her in the fight with healing, but you're also putting extra damage on whoever she's engaging. This way, you can help push enemies over the line, or maybe confirm kills on anyone who steps just outside of the Emma's reach. Now that's the most obvious use, but there are several more. Say the Emma in this example is trying to take down an Invisible Woman, or a Psylocke, or a Loki, and they try to turn invisible and slip away. The Emma might have a hard time tracking them down, but by simply clipping them with your beam, you can reveal them immediately. Or say there's an enemy shield in front of the Emma. Angling your beam through her will help take that barrier down a bit faster, allowing her to continue being aggressive. Or say there are some Namor turrets behind the line preventing your flankers from getting busy. If you can find the right angle, you can shoot through the Emma, healing her, helping her to get kills, helping track down invisible enemies, and helping to clean up the enemy deployables, all at the same time. But say there's also, let's say, an Iron Man holding an angle and spamming into the choke point. Angle your beam another way, and you can pressure him off of that angle, all while potentially doing everything else I already mentioned. Now I know that this might sound brainless, but it really isn't. It's not like you just press the button and everything is done for you. The Jeff player still has to make the call on what they should focus on, and then find the right angles that allow them to get as much value as they can out of their beam. You need to decide if you want to be pressuring people off of sightlines, cleaning up deployables, or pumping damage into enemy shields. All while you need to be aware of who on your team would best benefit from the healing and extra damage, And you need to be looking for angles and opportunities to do as much as possible with your beam at all times. And there are still even more uses for this beam. The constant damage allows Jeff to very quickly destroy terrain, and it also makes Jeff very useful for gathering information. Clipping an enemy with your beam for even a moment reveals to you how much health they have, which can be extremely valuable information if you're communicating. If a Penny Parker is trying to throw mines into your backline, angling your beam into her will actually destroy those mines in midair. If you see a Loki use his totem, Joyful Splash can very quickly destroy them if you angle your beam the right way. And a final thing I love about this beam is that it allows you to support your team by putting damage into things your teammates might not have the time or mental energy to focus on. In the fast-paced environment of a team fight, your teammates might not be able to spend the time to chase down an invisible enemy, or shoot a Namor turret, or pressure someone off of a sightline, but you can take that burden off of their shoulders. You are virtually always going to be using your beam because you need to always be healing, which means that you can always look for an opportunity to put damage into something that needs to be taken care of. And because using your beam encourages you to hang back, you're going to be much better at identifying these things than someone who's in the thick of it. But unlike a lot of other supports, you're not just heal botting. Other supports can spend the vast majority of their time just clicking their allies and managing a cooldown or two. But for Jeff, there's a lot more mental energy involved in angling your beam. Now don't get me wrong, all this might sound like I'm trying to say using Joyful Splash is challenging, but I'm really not. Jeff is still a 1-star difficulty character, so it's fairly easy, but that doesn't mean it's not satisfying to do well, and both of those factors help make the new Jeff fittingly chill. So what I'm saying is, this reworked ability checks all the boxes. It's both stronger and more fun than it used to be, while also still being easy for a new player to grasp. It's everything anyone could reasonably ask of a Jeff rework. But of course, this ability isn't all that impressive on its own. The healing is still just okay, and now even worse at longer distances. And while the damage is nice because it's always going to be hitting something, the numbers are, again, just alright. But Jeff still has 2 more abilities that received similar big overhauls, and both are on opposite sides of the same coin when it comes to neatly tying back into Joyful Splash. The healing bubble changes were another big surprise to me when it came to how well they actually played. Unlike some people, I wasn't really concerned about the removal of Jeff's burst healing. More healing in exchange for it being healing over time felt like a reasonable pivot to me. But what was up with cutting the charges in half? Well, I underestimated just how much better Jeff's healing got, and the reduction in charges actually helped to make using Healing Bubble way more interesting. All it takes to save someone is 1 or 2 bubbles and a little use of Joyful Splash, provided they aren't positioning like an idiot. And that, combined with the reduction in charges, means using your healing bubbles feels a lot more deliberate. Before, it was easy to just hammer the button for Healing Bubble whenever you felt like you needed it, but not so much anymore. With only 3 charges, and with each charge doing much more healing, you have to think a fair bit more about how you want to use them, and make sure to always keep track of how many charges you have. And you have to remember that everything else about Healing Bubble is still in play. It still has the speed boost, it still has the plus healing received buff, you could still essentially leave health packs for your team wherever you want, and Healing Bubble is still a core part of what makes Jeff so survivable. I'm gonna pick up Jeff's survivability later, but everything that made Healing Bubble great is still there. It's just that you have to think and plan more, and just like Joyful Splash, it's not all that hard, but it still makes it more satisfying to do well. And if it stopped there, that'd be great, but Healing Bubble actually has a few new applications as well. If someone's wounded, but you need to focus your attention elsewhere, you can easily just toss a bubble on them and leave them at that. And this works because of the increased healing and the healing over time. Unlike before, where if you tossed a bubble on someone it was one and done, your teammates will keep getting healed for a while after you turn away from them, allowing you to keep your attention focused on other things for longer. And a funny new use that I discovered completely by accident actually relates to Jeff's ultimate. Before, when you activated its Jeff, you would be stuck at whatever health you were at before you used it, because Jeff became completely untargetable. Now, though, the healing over time from Healing Bubble actually still works while you're in this untargetable state, and this opens up new ways to use the ultimate. You can use it as an escape tool, retreating into the ground and popping up wherever you want with full health, maybe even swallowing up a few enemies and disrupting the enemy's positioning while you do. You can also use it way more aggressively, ulting in a stupid spot and using the healing to come out of it alive. But now we move on to the ability that people were perhaps the most mad about when the rework was first shown off, and that was Jeff's spit attack. What the hell was anyone supposed to do with this? 3 shots that had to recharge one by one, with the only upside being a knockback effect. And the knockback only worked on direct hits. This had to be the most worthless ability in the game, right? Yeah, no. Knockback, or any kind of displacement effect, really, I think is one of the most underrated effects in any hero shooter. And Jeff's knockback is downright disposable. So long as you're not spamming them for no reason, you're basically always going to have charges whenever you want. Okay then, but what are the actual applications of this knockback? Oh, there are so many. Part of the reason knockback effects are so strong is, very basically, knocking someone off the ground temporarily puts them in a position where they can't move. And you need to move to do basically everything. So, you're putting them in a position where they're basically helpless unless they use a cooldown to escape. As this applies to Jeff, the most common application for his knockback is temporarily trapping someone when they try to take an aggressive position. Gamers like to walk back and forth a lot, and the reason they do this is because they're looking for opportunities to hit an impactful shot or use a cooldown in an impactful way, while also trying to minimize the risk of taking that aggressive position for too long. Landing direct spit attacks and knocking them up in the air holds them in that aggressive position for longer than they want to be, and especially in a game with a time to kill this fucked up, holding that aggressive position for even a second too long can spell their death. This is even better if you can really hit your shots, allowing you to juggle people and hold them in those dangerous positions for longer. And this juggling technique has many uses. This technique can be used to save your teammates. If, say, someone got grabbed by a Wolverine, you can hold that Wolverine in one spot, allowing them to back up out of his melee range. In the midst of a chaotic team fight, knocking someone up in the air and juggling them can also help give your teammates someone to focus on. Gamers love enemies who can't fight back, and you might not even have to call anything out to have them focus on the enemy you just rendered helpless. And speaking of focusing people, if you hit a flying character, it actually temporarily knocks them out of the air. If they're playing with their team, flying just out of reach above the team fight, this can drag them down just within range, and your teammates will relish the opportunity to take advantage of a flyer who's found themselves in a bad spot. And if they're up high, shooting down at your team from afar, then hitting them can still scare them off. If they're up that high, that means they're far away from cover and from the support of their team, which means their only form of defense is their movement, and simply hitting them once disrupts that movement. Speaking of movement, these knockback effects actually interrupt a bunch of movement abilities. You can hit Penny out of her web swing and stop Hulk from jumping, and even interrupt Doctor Strange's fly. And it also interrupts slow fall effects from characters like Rocket. And speaking of Doctor Strange, a really satisfying use of this effect is interrupting people trying to jump on you. Strange players love jumping on people with their ultimates, but if you can see it coming and hold them in the air, then you could potentially cause them to miss their ultimate entirely. This also works if a dive character tries to jump on you. If you can hit them, you're gonna really screw up their momentum, and usually they're just gonna get flustered and retreat if that happens. And none of that was even mentioning the most obvious use of a knockback effect: pushing people off of cliffs and off of the objective. And all those were just the use cases I personally could think of. So yeah, even a little bit of knockback applied correctly can have a big effect. But none of this would work if not for Jeff's other abilities. Like I've said, the supports in this game generally have to be healing all the time, and taking your finger off the heal button for even a moment can put your teammates at great risk. However, this risk is greatly mitigated by two things. For one, the large amounts of healing over time provided by your bubbles allows you to take your eyes off your teammates without as much risk of them just dropping dead. And for two, I'm actually going to circle back to something I brought up earlier. Jeff can very easily weave his spit attack in with Joyful Splash. Before, this was questionably worth it, because your reward for taking your eyes off your teammates and your finger off the heal button was just some damage. It was almost always better to just not bother and put all your focus into maximizing your healing output. Now, however, the knockback and all the uses that has means this can be very worthwhile. One of the ideal scenarios looks something like this. You're healing a teammate and you spot someone you want to toss into the air. You throw a bubble on your teammate to make sure they're still getting healed, and then you start shooting the enemy. After 3 quick shots, you then instantly go back to healing with Joyful Splash, perhaps even moving to angle your beam so you could hit the person you were just juggling and maybe finish them off. Assuming your teammates don't finish them off for you, of course. That, or they live, except they are now really fucking pissed off at you for juggling them again and are now going to way overextend and waste a bunch of time and resources chasing you, which is also basically a win. And as has been the theme for this rework, all of this is simple but very satisfying to do right. Again, you have to hit direct hits to get the knockback effect, which means you have to have good aim on top of all the awareness required to do this well. You need to be looking for opportunities. All while you need to be doing all the calculations required to properly use your other abilities, and you need to be hitting your shots. And if you're trying to juggle people, you need to be hitting those shots consecutively. When all this comes together, Jeff becomes one of the most fun and consistently rewarding feeling supports in the game. It feels good to use Joyful Splash to help confirm kills, mop up deployables, and pressure people. It feels good to save and support your team with deliberate use of your bubbles. It feels good to secure kills by juggling people, or to use the knockback to disrupt what might otherwise be an impactful play. And all of that before we get into 2 final aspects of Jeff's kit. A lot of people made a big stink about the nerfs to Jeff's survivability, but as you've likely seen by now with all the Jeff footage I've shown, you are still really hard to kill when you try to be. And that there is the key. You have to actually try to be hard to kill now. The removal of Jeff's burst healing means you can't just get yourself back to full health instantly whenever you want. So if you want to save yourself, you need to be evasive. You need to be good with your movement and have a plan for where you want to retreat and how you're going to survive getting there. And if you want a plan like that, that means you need to be good at positioning and you need to be aware of your surroundings. It's still extremely difficult for a lot of lone enemies to kill you, and Jeff is still virtually immune to chip damage and random spam, but those instances where you need to escape from certain enemies gunning for you are going to be a lot more engaging. And, crucially, it's now way more fun to fight and chase down a Jeff. Instead of the Jeff being able to just hit his invincibility buttons and run when he's in danger, leaving whoever was trying to engage him in the dust, he now has to coast off of a limited pool of resources to stay alive, and this reveals a new weakness. Even if you're playing someone who can't break through Jeff's self-healing, as long as you're chasing a Jeff, you're running him out of resources, and the dynamic becomes a race to see if the Jeff can get to a position of safety before he becomes vulnerable. It's a lot more fun to play against compared to before, where there was virtually no point in chasing a Jeff that was on the run. That, and with the removal of his burst healing, it is now much easier to kill a Jeff if you catch him off guard. Black Panther in particular just fucking murders Jeff. So for those of you who found Jeff's immortality frustrating, there's a lot more options for counterplay now. And for those of you who just got a ton of joy out of being an unkillable little bastard as Jeff, that aspect of his kit is still there. But continuing the themes present in the rest of his rework, you have to think more, and you have to put the work in, which means it's more satisfying to do well. But now we move on to the thing that I'm sure a lot of you have been thinking of for a while. I'm sure every time I've brought up something new about Jeff's kit that looked cool or fun, a lot of you thought something along the lines of, okay, cool, but that doesn't make up for the fact that they gutted DPS Jeff, which is understandable. DPS Jeff was a popular playstyle. It was really cool and unique that you could play this baby's first support as a menacing flanker, and it was really lame that they reworked him and now you can still play this baby's first support as a menacing flanker. Wait, what? Yet DPS Jeff is still a possible alternate playstyle, and people found this out like the day of the rework. Something the indomitable human spirit. But how? Jeff can pressure people and help confirm kills with his beam, but the beam can't kill people by itself. And there's no way Jeff can get kills with only 3 charges of his spit attack, right? I mean, the damage is just alright, as we've discussed. Right. So about that, I may have been lying to you a little bit. See, without a serious incentive to hit direct shots, a lot of people treated Jeff like most other characters with splash damage. Aim for the enemy's feet to maximize the chances of hitting them, regardless of the reduced damage. But with the new incentive to not only hit direct shots, but to aim for consecutive direct hits, people discovered something. Wait a minute, this attack actually does pretty good damage. Okay, so that's probably obvious to a lot of you, but if you look here, you can see that Jeff's 3 charges aren't enough to kill someone, even with 3 direct hits. Now that can still be valuable. I mean, DPS Jeff as a playstyle to begin with was always way more focused on annoying people than it was on actually killing people, but ideally, we want to be actually killing the enemies here. But how are we going to do that? Each charge on Jeff's spit attack recharges fairly quickly, but not nearly fast enough. If only Jeff had another method of dealing damage that was really easy to use, so you could use it to easily mop up someone who had just been hit with 3 direct hits and a short spritz from Joyful Splash is all Jeff needs to finish someone. It's hardly the fastest TTK in the game, but it's not bad at all. If you catch an invisible woman and her team isn't there to help her, she's toast. And if you catch a Luna Snow or a Loki and they don't have the cooldowns to save themselves, then they're also toast. And even if they do have the cooldowns to deny your kill, all that means is that they're wasting valuable resources trying to fight a fish who's just gonna fuck off halfway across the map before they can try to fight back. Remember, Jeff is still extremely slippery and hard to kill, so no support is gonna waste time trying to kill him when they have teammates they need to heal. And by the time that Luna, Snow, or Loki's self-heal is gone and on cooldown, well, you already have the charges built up to go right back in, potentially confirming the kill this time. Also, and I'm just sticking this here because I couldn't fit this anywhere else in the script, remember how they buffed Jeff's damage resistance passive? Jeff is actually a fair bit better at 1v1ing people now. The damage breakpoints we talked about are mostly the same, but you are much better at standing up to, say, a Star-Lord or a Punisher. But anyway, if you just loved annoying the shit out of people as DPS Jeff, then that's still here in spades. But again, continuing the themes present in the rest of the rework, you have to put the work in, which means it's way more satisfying to pull off. And even more so if you're like me and you actually get a kick out of supporting your teammates. See, the cap placed on how long you can remain in hide and seek, the reduction in healing bubble charges reducing the amount of time you can maintain your speed boost, and the overall reduction in Jeff's survivability have drastically capped Jeff's threat range. This serves a few purposes. For one, it makes a flanking Jeff a bit more manageable to play against. Because Jeff can't just be completely immortal by himself, he needs to position well such that he always has a safe place to retreat. And the consistently safest place for a Jeff to retreat to is back to the loving arms of his team. This means less flanking Jeffs appearing 50 miles behind the line. And this, of course, also has consequences for the Jeff player. Because you're on a much shorter leash, you're going to be spending much more time near your team. In addition, the limited charges on your spit attack means that you can't just go full aggro all the time. You have to save your charges for when you're going for a pick. So what are you doing when you're spending time around your team not shooting the enemies? You're healing and supporting. You see what they've done? The devs have reworked Jeff such that flanking is still a viable playstyle, while also subtly nudging the player to, actually do their fucking job as a support every now and again. For someone like me who loved Corvus and Paladins and who loves Cloak and Dagger now, this is a dream come true. I love supporting my team. but I also love being able to seize on opportunities to play aggressively, and that's exactly what the new Jeff can do. So with this rework, Jeff now has 3 possible modes that all intersect at various junctions. You have full support Jeff, who hangs back and primarily uses Joyful Splash and Healing Bubble to heal and help confirm kills, as well as using his spit attack whenever he sees an opportunity. Then you have full DPS Jeff, who uses his high mobility and survivability alongside his spit attack and Joyful Splash to harass and try to get picks. But now you have a third playstyle, a sort of intermittent Jeff who supports his team but who's also always looking for opportunities to duck into the flank to make a valuable aggressive play. This rules, frankly. This is the most fun and varied Jeff, or really any of the supports in Rivals, have ever been. It's basically everything I wanted out of a Jeff rework, and it strikes that balance that you want the supports in a game like this to hit. Months ago, I brought up the idea that support characters as we now think of them have 3 pillars. They heal, they provide utility, and they leverage additional offensive power. I complained back then that most of the supports in Rivals were all in on healing. It was hard for them to leverage additional offensive power, and most of them had limited utility options and/or utility options that just weren't very interesting to use. The new Jeff addresses all of these problems, and it not only makes him, in my opinion, the most fun support in the game right now, but it also makes me really hopeful for the future of the supports in this game. Jeff leverages healing and utility with Joyful Splash and Healing Bubble, and can leverage additional offensive power in several ways with the new Joyful Splash and his spit attack, and all that while still being simple and easy for a new player to grasp. It's everything anyone could ask for, really. That said, there's one final thing I want to bring up, and it has to do with the hyper-casual fans and their relationship to Jeff. Now, I'm sure we can all appreciate NetEase's attempt to artfully draw attention to the painful nature of love by making Jeff's attempts to give kisses deal damage, but that still means a fun, wacky thing that people enjoyed was effectively removed from the game. You can no longer go up to the enemy Jeff and show him some love, and you can't do other silly things like harmlessly blow water up the enemy's ass either. It's understandable to be irritated at the loss of something you enjoyed, especially when it was something harmless and silly like Jeff kisses, but there are plenty more wacky, foolish things you can do with Jeff. Did you find it weird that they nerfed Jeff's ult charge? Well, that was actually done because Jeff gets his ultimate stupid fast thanks to the new Joyful Splash, and there are at least a dozen stupid fun things you can do with Jeff's ultimate. Even more so now that it gives your allies overhealth, allowing you to have fun throwing teammates at the enemy's head without that just being suicidal. Of course, that's something more applicable to actual games, but if you're the kind of person who spends hours in the lawless wastes of practice Doom match, there's still plenty you can do there too. Use Healing Bubble to blow people kisses, mindlessly walk at people snapping your jaws, practice your skywriting with Joyful Splash, or use one of Jeff's many animation cancel dances. The thing about a game like this is that it's as dumb and silly as you want to make it. So if you're one of those people irritated because the reworked Jeff looked less silly, I say load up the game and just start fucking around. Get creative and see what happens, and I'm sure you'll have some fun. Because for people who like doing stupid shit usually comes naturally. So, yeah. I think the Jeff rework is great, actually. Nearly everything about his kit that was fun is still there, and much more. He has appeal for new players, experienced support players, and the people on the fringes who like to do weird experimental stuff. Simply put, he's more viable than he was before, he's more interesting than he was before, and he's more fun than he was before. Are there still problems with his kit? Absolutely. He may be more viable now, but he's probably still the worst support in the game. A big reason for this is his ultimate. As fun, iconic, and situationally strong as its Jeff is, it sadly just doesn't compare to the 8 to 12 second invincibility circles we see on the other supports, especially against more experienced players who know how to counter it. At this point, I honestly don't really know how you'd fix Jeff to make him better competitively. Maybe we can take another look at buffing his numbers, or maybe we could implement that water puddle idea I proposed back when, but frankly, that's not what I care about. New Jeff is a lot of fun, and he's shown me what is possible to do with a support within this game's various design constraints. I said earlier that Jeff makes me really excited to see where the devs will take the game's other supports in future, and I meant it. And for now, that's good enough for me. Alright, so we're back with another installment of the notes at the end of the video. I'm going to try and be much faster this time because I got some feedback on that the notes were too long. So, first things first, before I say anything else, this video is too long, and I know it's too long, so I better not get any comments about how this video is too long, because it's too long, and I know that. So just with that is, I only noticed really how long the video was gonna be, kind of halfway through recording it, so I had to make the choice, basically, of whether or not I wanted to get this video out before the end of August, or if I wanted to, like, rework the script. And so, it was important to me that I got a video out before the end of August, so here we are. This was something I was already planning to do, but even more so now after this project, that I really want to take a look at my writing style. But anyway, holy shit, my last video did really, really fucking well. Like, I believe right now it's sitting at like 65k, and I'm sitting at like just under 2,000 subscribers, which makes my last video kind of funny, because there I was talking about like how cool it was that I had a video that did 120 views and that I had like 20 subscribers. No. Fuck, I had like 120 subscribers and a certain amount of 3.7k views. That was it. Which blows... Anyway, this newest... My Sniper Conundrum, that video, blew that video out of the fucking water. So that's funny. Kinda utterly blows me away that happened. I don't really know... I was expecting my second video, the video on Marvel Rivals Season 2.5, to be my best performing video, because I jumped onto a topic that was kind of trending around, and now that is by far my worst video, which is really, it's just kind of funny how you have an idea and then reality shits on it. If I needed more of an excuse to keep making these videos, that was everything I needed. Like, holy shit, this was utterly mind-boggling. I really don't know how to think about it. And I have no idea how well this video is going to do. Probably not as well as the last one. But, like, I didn't think my last video was going to do as well as the video before that, so who fucking knows? Like, realistically, this video isn't going to do as well, because that last video was talking about, like, 4 different games, so there's a much broader audience, you know? This also motivates me to take a look at my writing style in the future, because, like, now my videos are going to be have a real solid chance of reaching, like, thousands of people, which is insane. And yeah, I can talk at length about how I was completely not expecting that video to do nearly as well as it did, but you know, I'm trying to keep this short and I have other stuff to talk about, so I wanted to address just 2 things from the comments on the last video, because I narrowed it down to just 2 things, because I could talk for days about the response to that video. So, number 1 is people talking about Ana, the character in Overwatch, in regards to snipers, talking about, like, why didn't you bring up Ana? Or one person even brought up, like, how my definition of sniper excluded Ana, which was a deliberate choice. And the reason I made that choice was because Ana, in a gameplay sense, does not fulfill the role of a sniper. Like, sure, in the lore of Overwatch, she is a sniper, but, like, in gameplay, she does not serve that function. The player does not respect an Ana's sightline, is the most important thing. Like, when you're fighting like a Widowmaker or a Hanzo in Overwatch, you respect their sightline. And you do not respect an Ana's sightline. Like, she has a very different role. So that was the first thing I wanted to bring up. And the second thing was something that was really fucking funny, which is people saying that Team Fortress 2 is not a hero shooter. Which, yes, it is. I don't know what to tell you. Yes, it is. It is like the second tag on the store page. It is like, by every definition I can think of, Team Fortress 2 is a hero shooter. Like, I didn't even know that this was like a thing, like an opinion that people had before I made that video. It was like, so you know, I gotta confess something. I use 4chan every now and again, as you know, if you watched my video on Season 2.5. And like, sometimes I post on 4chan. Mostly I just browse, but sometimes I just post. Sometimes I post a little bit. And I would, in the MRG, the Marvel Rivals General on VG, I would post, like, you know, talking about Team Fortress 2 being a hero shooter. And let me tell you, not even, like, the 4chan autists disagreed with me when I said that. So I have no idea. I have no earthly idea where this opinion is coming from. And it was really fucking funny, like, reading all these comments. So when I was thinking about sticking with this whole YouTube thing, I was having some anxiety about not having enough things to talk about. And the thing I've been learning is that weirdos on the internet will give you no shortage of things to talk about. Like I want to wrap this up, like, in a moment. Just, like, I don't know where this is coming from. If there's, like, some kind of, like, you know those Japanese soldiers in the Pacific Islands who thought World War II hadn't ended for, like, 20 years or whatever? Like, it's like these weird, isolated TF2 fans who are still mad about Overwatch. I don't know. I don't know where that comes from. So, you know, I think that's everything. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to like and subscribe and stick around, please do. I want to reiterate, just from last time, my plan is to alternate between a serious video and a less serious video. So, last time we had a serious video. It was like 40 minutes long. This was supposed to be a less serious video, and it ended up being like an hour long. So, you know, balls. So my plan is next time to do a less serious video, to, like, do like a 20-30 minute long video. We'll see if I do it. I might not. But that's the plan. And another one of my vague plans as of right now is I want to get into, at some point, doing like, reviews of games, because that's like an infinite content farm, basically. There are a billion games that I could make reviews on. I know this whole YouTube thing. I'm going to stick to my lane, stick to these, like, game design video essays, until I feel like it is a good time to do that. But that's my plan. And I'm also still planning on doing, like I said last time, the very serious video, a several hour long video. And that's still a ways out if it does happen. And you can remember to bully the shit out of me into doing it if you want. But aside from that, I don't really have anything else to say. So thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe. And yeah, see you.